going to go ahead and just get us started because we have a pretty full meeting, and then people will just come in as they come in. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and get us started here. If you don't just see a single screen, please do shout out so that I don't show you all the stuff you don't need to see. All right, hopefully you're all just seeing one single screen right now. And I just want to say again, welcome and thank you for being here. And we're going to go ahead and begin this convening with the land acknowledgement. So we would like to open this convening by recognizing that we are on the unceded ancestral lands of the Coast Salish peoples, the traditional home of all the tribes and bands within the Duwamish, Suquamish, Tulalip, and Muckleshoot nations. And we cannot work to fulfill our mission and our vision of an anti-racist present if we don't first acknowledge and also recognize the true history and the cost of colonization. However, acknowledgement is only a first step. And so we urge you to engage in accountable relationships and informed actions. Just some quick announcements. Maybe I'll see some of you this evening. I will be there at Seattle First Baptist Church this evening to hear from the district Seattle council candidates for District 1, 3, 4, and 5. That is tonight at 6 p.m. There is some food, there is some childcare. So definitely if you can come on in and learn about comprehensive plan and how these different candidates are thinking about it. It's kind of 2 districts from north of the Ship Canal, 2 districts south of the Ship Canal. And so, you know, as you're starting to think about November and as we're starting to think about what we want to see, it's always good to make sure that we're understanding that 20-year vision for Seattle and what the candidates think. So please do join me this evening if you can. Also, just to remind you on our calendar for future meetings, we have October 11th. It is going to be a 10 a.m. meeting, which is unusual for us, but it was a date and time that worked around the Housing Washington Conference. And then we will be back at our regular time on November 1st, and that will be at 1 p.m. We also do have now the Rothstein Book Event and Covenant Homeownership Act celebration that is still scheduled for November 2nd. It will be at the Seattle University Campion Ballroom, and it'll be from 2 to 4 in the afternoon. Registration's open right now, and there really is going to be limited capacity, so do register as soon as possible. I want to see all of you there. The tickets are going to be free thanks to sponsors. So thank you so much to all of our sponsors who are helping this community building event happen without any barriers to access. In terms of the December event to look forward to, please put on your calendar 10 a.m. to noon for our BHI Policy Summit. And that is where we are going to be able to present the framework that we're going to be working through over the next few months so that everyone can have a sense of what we're going to be advocating for as we move into 2024. And then lastly, of course, I hope you'll still be receiving the policy digest every week that I send out. Please do reach out to me with items. I love to highlight things that are happening. And I also encourage you to send that sign up link to basically everyone and anyone who might be interested. Lastly, in terms of announcements, there's 2 big opportunities to kind of really get involved if you wanted to kind of step up your involvement a little bit. The Seattle Housing Levy, the Yes for Homes campaign is happening. Voters will be voting in November. And so right now it's basically kind of get out the vote, get out there and talk to people about this. Seattle Housing Levy was part of our 2023 framework. It's going to be a huge impact in the effort that we're trying to make here as Black Home Initiative. So if you are interested in co-sponsoring or organizing or engaging with volunteers around phone or text banking, we can offer the HDC office or your own location or wherever works for you. We're also looking for volunteers to go door knocking, basically, to get out the word, and we'll provide you with all the materials. We could come up with a map. And then email your personal network and just share on social media what's happening with the Yes for Homes campaign. Get that on people's radar. And then also, if you want to do a visibility event, something that you can think of in your community that's going to make sense. If you're interested in fundraising, that's another way to contribute. And we have Chad Vasilin on the call, and he would be happy to put in his contact info into the chat, and you can reach out to him. You can also reach out to me. And then secondly, aligned with the Rothstein event we're going to do in November, we are having that Covenant Homeownership Act celebration community building event as half of that program. So we'll have basically the on-stage kind of book discussion that patients will lead, and then we'll be celebrating the act. So I really do hope to see you all there. You were absolutely instrumental in making sure that that groundbreaking law was passed. We want to try to create community connection through this as much as possible. So if you have an idea about a book activity, a chat, a happy hour, something that happened in October that gets people motivated to read Just Action or to think about how they feel about the changes that are occurring with the Covenant Homeownership Account Act, then please reach out to me and I'd be happy to support you with any ideas for October. In terms of today's agenda, I'm going to go ahead and go through kind of a draft idea version of a framework that can elicit some conversation. This is not supposed to be a the framework is figured out and we're just looking for approval. This is a complete, we're at 2%. We want to build, and I'm just going to put something out there and we're going to get some response. We'll then be hearing about the 2024 reintroduction, the lot splitting bill from Dan Bertolet. Patients will be walking us through the 2024 Affordable Homes Program, a draft budget proviso. You received that this morning. If you didn't have a chance to review it, it's totally okay. Patients is going to be walking through and looking for input. Again, another idea for what to do next year that's kind of right at the ground floor, and we're looking for your input to make sure this is a smart idea. And then after that, we'll have Jesse Simpson come in and just give us an update. There's some things that are happening around the Seattle Comprehensive Plan that are brand new that will determine kind of how we move forward in the future. So just going to hear a few minutes from Jesse about that update. And then, of course, we'll open the floor for news from you because it is important for us to share and learn what we're doing together. So if you have something you're thinking about, definitely jot it off to the side, and remember you're going to have some minutes at the end of the meeting. If we run out of time there, please send it back to me and I'll be happy to send it out. And then before we kind of begin discussing those priorities for 2024, I just think it's important to remember what we're trying to achieve. So the purpose of the BHI Network Policy Group is to create the policy changes needed to meet that BHI shared priority. And that is that 1,500 new low to moderate income Black households owning their home. And that's in the South Seattle, South King County, and kind of North Pierce County area. And we're in the process now. So in terms of it being a 5-year goal, we're actually in the first of the 5 years. So we're talking about July 2027. We will be able to meet that goal, and we're going to do it by increasing community engagement and our aligned actions. So we're going to try to connect those dots between the pieces of information to form that knowledgeable action step. We'll create momentum for that change by growing the network, amplifying efforts, and through focusing on relationships. And then we'll think concretely, what do we want to achieve? What is our strategy for a multi-year mindset? The change we're trying to create has taken more than decades to be where it is. So it is going to take time. We've given ourselves a period of time to meet some goals, but we want to make sure that we are being strategic. So as we consider our priorities for 2024 in terms of that homeownership policy framework that we are all going to vet together and then mobilize and advocate for in the new year, let's just keep this in mind why we're here. And also remember there's going to be some caveats around, what the next legislative session is, what might be happening there with a 60-day session, so a short session. So we're going to just continue to adjust. And then in terms of what we're doing as we consider those policy actions, I'm just going to highlight the way that we had decided to organize the framework last year. So what we're looking for as a criteria for any item that would be in our homeownership policy framework is that it is a policy action that will most effectively increase Black homeownership. Within those 4 kind of funding areas, the kind of different categories of funding, cost reduction, zoning and regulatory reform, and then that acquisition of land and the value capture. And we're going to be looking at those policy levels, both on the city level, the county level, and the state level. And there are a lot of items we could talk about. There are tons of things that we could think we might want to advocate for, but we're really going to try hold true to that idea of what's most effectively going to increase Black homeownership. And that's the aspect that we're going to really be fighting for when we are talking about the different items that we might consider. And so what I'm going to put up now is just kind of a complete and utter draft. So this is not a completed policy framework. This is not intended for this to be a finished product. This is pretty much a list of items that are from the 2023 framework. And these are all kind of still in process. You know, there are new possible policies that we know might be underway, maybe. Heard some rumors. There are ones that we are definitely sure are underway, and we kind of have points of contacts and champions that we can work with. But again, we have a short legislative session for state items this year. That means it's also going to be a supplemental budget year. So there are going to be inherent constraints about what can be achieved as we think about state legacy this year. But just to go through here, you know, some of these items are going to be things that you've seen before because we advocated for them for our 2023 framework. So comprehensive plan updates, we have been talking about the whole time in our zoning and regulatory reform bucket. That is going to continue forward. Seattle has got their 2024 version. Other cities and jurisdictions have their timelines, but a lot of that is happening right now. So that's kind of an inclusive idea. And then the Seattle Equitable Development Zoning Pilot, we have been following its progress as phase 1. And all of the recommendations for phase 1 were approved in July. And so now it's moving into its phase 2. And so we'll be able to learn more about that. In terms of state level actions for zoning and regulatory reform, we have lot splitting. We had advocated for that last year. It's going to be coming back. Transit-oriented development did not pass last year, and it will be coming back. There's a new idea around the Housing Trust Fund and the idea of changing their per household funding cap when it's coming to homeownership. There's also a new idea about affordable housing parking requirements and making sure that kind of regulatory reform can occur. In the cost reduction bucket, we're looking at a new idea around Seattle utility fee waivers for affordable housing. And we, on the state level, will be hoping to hear whether or not there might be that anti-displacement property tax exemption. This was something that we talked about in 2023, but then it never actually came to as a bill. We're hoping that maybe 2024 will be the year for that, and you know, we'll understand as we move forward. And then the real estate excise tax exemption for affordable housing is a new idea to talk about and to unravel. There's also the idea of a construction sales tax exemption that we're hearing out there. In terms of the land acquisition and value capture bucket, the Seattle disposition of surplus lands is something that we should be thinking about, especially when we're talking about infill projects that could be great for homeownership. The King County Community Preference and Anti-Displacement Strategies, that's something that was in our 2023 framework and is something that is still in progress and is something that it's really important for us to continue to stay connected around. And then a new idea, kind of acquiring land near transit for affordable homes as an idea separate from what we may have talked about last year with the transit oriented development or the housing benefits district. This is something maybe just a little smaller, being very specific and an idea to consider. In our last bucket here, we have funding. Seattle Housing Levy, we are assuming will pass this fall. And if it is passed, we want to make sure that we're talking about that administrative and financial plan to ensure that homeownership lands up being implemented the way it was promised. Also, in terms of the county level, the King County Permanently Affordable Homeownership Development Funding, thinking about should there be something dedicated, what could that look like? What might that be? The Equitable Development Initiative is something that has been going this whole period of time. The zoning pilot that we've been following last year is kind of something that came from that development initiative, and it's in its implementation over these years. And we want to make sure that we're tracking that and ensuring that that implementation is consistent with our priority. And then for funding for state level bills, we have the wealth tax, which we had advocated very strongly for last year, and we're going to be working with Senator Frame to make sure that we can be really strong in support this year. The Housing Trust Fund, we always want to make sure it's going to be receiving as much funding as it can, and that homeownership is a part of that. The Affordable Homes Act is something that we had landed up navigating for, had been advocating for last year, and it will be reintroduced in 2024. The Washington Future Fund gained a lot of traction in 2023, and we're going to continue to work with people there and support them for it to gain even more traction in 2024. And then we have the new bill that Patience will walk you through, the idea of the Affordable Homes Program budget proviso. So not necessarily a bill, but a budget proviso. And then the idea of a potential revolving construction loan for affordable home ownership on a state level. And, you know, that's something that we can discuss as we move forward. So these are basically those items that might be a part of 2024 policy framework. It's basically kind of what we're going to be looking at over the next couple of months as we meet. And then we are going to want to get your input and make sure that, you know, if you know the champion, you're communicating that. If there's something we should know, if there's something that's missing. I don't really love keeping a screen up. I really prefer that people are able to see one another. But as we move through these 4 buckets, I know it's also sometimes important for people to be able to read the item when they're talking about it. So I am going to keep showing a little bit more of a slideshow. But please do feel like, you know, when we get to the point here, I'm going to be asking for input, definitely, you know, jump on in. And I know you've all done Zooms. It's not so easy to be able to see the room when you're sharing a screen. So if we can feel okay with, you know, unmuting and jumping in there and just being courteous to each other, that would be great.
Bambi, I'll be the first to jump in. I just have a quick question on the funding for the wealth tax. Where were those revenues pegged to go in the bill last year?
So for wealth tax, it had kind of 3 kitties. So it was, you know, towards home ownership, towards education, and then towards developing your business, like a personal business. So those were the 3 areas you could invest. And again, today we're not going to necessarily be able to go through every item and delineate all of them, because we're going to spend the next 2 months hearing presentations on each of them. But yeah, I may or may not have top of mind the answers to some of the questions. All right, so I'm going to just move us into 1 bucket at a time. Let's keep it 1 bucket at a time so that we don't get overwhelmed. So for zoning and regulatory reform, we are basically trying to make things less difficult. We are trying to get more built. We are trying to get more people into homes, and we're going to be able to do that when we can clear the way. Part of that is, what are we thinking about for the big vision, for example, in comprehensive plans? That's a 20-year vision. You know, once you get out of the window of contributing to that, there's like a whole scaffold there that isn't going to change that much. So we really want to be getting in there, especially on Seattle Comprehensive Plan and other cities that would kind of be within our shared priority, South Seattle and then Northern Pierce, and think about how we can influence that. And part of what's happening with those comprehensive plans is that people have to look at their housing element. They have to understand what kind of housing is happening there and how are they going to plan for that for those 20 years. So we're going to be very involved. And then Seattle Equitable Development Zoning Pilot, again, already said, we had tracked that all last year. It did an excellent job of making its arguments for the zoning changes, and I will certainly send out more information about what happened with that ordinance, but it was fully supported, and now it's moving on to a phase 2. We don't have any county level that we've heard about for zoning and regulatory reform right now, so it'd be interesting to understand if any of you have something to add. And then on the state level, we're talking about the reinitiation of lot splitting, and we're going to hear about that from Dan in just a minute. Transit-oriented development didn't make it through last year, and it will be coming back through. So we'll be able to hear presentations on that in the future. And then the two other are addressing kind of small things that are big, like the housing trust fund per household funding cap. The idea of how that funding is allocated is really important. And so the idea of going back in and saying, let's address that cap and see what we can do. And then housing parking requirements. These are bottom line things for whenever we are talking about developing housing. So knowing those four, the idea is that, opening to the room, you see those four things and you say to yourself, oh, this is missing. You didn't know. Here's this thing that might be happening. Please speak up and let us know. And then also, are any of those getting you excited where you feel like when I send out my advocacy call, you're going to answer it? So we're going to just spend a couple minutes here to talk about the bucket of the zoning and regulatory reform. And as long as people are feeling it's okay, I am going to go ahead and leave the screen up, just because I do think sometimes people need time to process stuff visually to be able to reference it. So what's missing? What didn't I hear in the grapevine? Or are you going, hey, I was kidding when I told you about that thing that you wrote down there? That's not going to happen. So anything coming up for anyone in the room here around zoning and regulatory reform, ideas for things to consider over the next couple months for inclusion in our framework? And it's totally okay. If there isn't anything missing, we hit it all, it's great.
I don't know if it's missing, but condo reform has been on the list, and it's so difficult. I don't see anybody jumping in this year. And I couldn't even tell you what it is exactly we should be asking for. But I think we got to make sure we think about ownership in the context both single family and multifamily, and condo litigation is the biggest barrier to ownership in the multifamily version.
Yeah, and Peter, there was a little bit of work that happened last session with a couple of bills that were trying to address condo reform a bit. Do you have anything you know of that's in the pipeline, or anyone? I know sometimes what happens with legislation is people don't want to hear that topic again for a minute, so they give it a pause. But
Yeah.
do you know of any advocates stepping forward thus far?
I've seen a couple of conversations. We should do this. We should get together. We should. And I don't see it getting traction. You're right. It's an exhausting topic. But maybe this should be the year of recalibration, and so it's not on the policy agenda, but somehow, some way we get deeper with our lawyer pals to figure this out.
All right. Thanks for that. Anything else coming up for anyone else around zoning and regulatory reform that's just plain out missing here?
I'll highlight, Bambi, that Peter is a resource to tap. And I wonder, Peter, as we think about future condominium reform legislation, if we can be tapping you and others like Joe and Stowe Reeves to really help think about what a path for legislation could look like on that work.
For this year?
Likely 25, given that it's a 60-day session, we would want a longer game plan to get us to a point where we have clarity on who the legislative champion is, what the particular issues are that we will zero in on for reform.
Yeah, I'm in. And I think there are some people, and Allison, you should be a part of this too. And realtors, and we could put together a small consortium to begin to discuss it. The idea I've heard about is a bigger insurance pool, or a different way to think about insurance. not letting the market per se dictate insurance availability. We ought to be talking to Jamie Peterson, who feels like he's done as much as he can, and he's the one that sort of controls the process. And so I agree, it's probably not a this year thing, but before we get too far, we probably should get the views of the electeds about, well, what is on the table in your view?
Absolutely. So it's worth putting a pin on it and circling back to an early 2025 Sonata session.
All right, sounds great. And please, if you mention what is missing, patients will not ask you to lead the effort. You can just say what is missing. So feel free to say what is missing without feeling like you're committing to anything. So we're going to move on to the other buckets. But before we do that, is there anything anyone is excited about that's in this current kind of 4 or 5 items in this bucket that you want to express something about?
Hey, Bambi, this is Adria. I wanted to, before we moved on, just mention something. I don't know where it fits, but in terms of the condos, is the parking being deeded to the property? That's one of the things that we're seeing an issue with. So just something to note there. And then there's just not, as far as I know, there's really no regulation on homeowners associations. And so thinking about really the power that they have and who is looking at how they wield that power.
Thank you, Adrian. All right. I'm going to go ahead and move us forward just in the interest of time.
Sorry, Bambi.
Oh, go ahead, Jason.
Yeah, just a question on the affordable housing parking requirements. It sounds like we're going to receive presentations at some point on just sort of all of these items. I'm just maybe this is maybe somebody else, you or somebody else on the call could answer this, but I guess, I mean, that's broad. And so I'm wondering what's the, what are we thinking on that?
I think it's, I think it still is broad at this moment, but the idea is that the parking requirements, are a real impediment to kind of cost and to how we think about developing homes and housing. And so really addressing that on the state level in a concrete way as a potential maybe fix item within something. So I don't think that it's specific because it's not yet specific, but we'll definitely continue to hear more.
I can jump in here too. This is a bill concept that Sightline is starting to shop around. No policy details yet, but broadly it's about reducing or eliminating parking requirements for affordable housing development. Still to be determined if there's any particular tie to transit access or if it's just about affordable housing generally.
Okay. Can I just make a suggestion when that does come up as a presentation? I'd love to hear from the affordable housing, the affordable homeownership developers that are part of the BHI network on like specific, like where this has been a problem, why they're unable to work. I mean, what are the issues that municipalities are unable to bridge? What I'm assuming I'm hearing is that these requirements are either making projects infeasible or limiting the number of units. So I'd love to sort of hear specifics around that.
That sounds great. I'm definitely making a note, Jason. So we're going to move forward to our next bucket, which is cost reduction. So we have on that just a few items here. The idea of a Seattle utility fee waiver for affordable housing. And then for the state level, again, we're hoping potentially there will be an anti-displacement property tax exemption coming forward. We'll get to hear from Assessor Wilson in the future here. That was something we thought would come in 2023, and then it didn't go forward in that year. So we're wondering about this 2024. And then the idea of a real estate excise tax exemption for affordable housing at a state level. And then again, the idea of a construction sales tax exemption. So you have all of your construction materials that you're needing to purchase. And maybe there could be a sales tax exemption when we're talking about permanently affordable home ownership, when we're talking about affordable housing. And again, these are broad at this moment. They're kind of in development. And so I'll ask, what is missing and what are you excited about? Anything on cost reduction we're thinking? And it's kind of hard to see people, but so feel free to, go ahead and start. Andrew, looks like your hand might be raised and there's another person. So go ahead and get started.
Well, yeah, I'm excited to learn more about what an anti-displacement property tax exemption could look like. And I'm interested maybe in this meeting to learn a little bit more about what the REIT exemption is for. There is one for transfers to affordable housing providers that was created a couple years ago, and I know that there is a similar exemption for transfers of some permanently affordable home ownership, but I'm curious if this relates to one of the ideas that came out of the homeownership disparities work group that was, I think, a REIT exemption for sales to first-time home buyers or something along those lines. I'm just curious to learn a little bit more about that one.
Thanks for that, Andrew. And if anyone has a particular answer, because this might be something they're championing or involved in, please feel free to respond. And then we had someone else who had their hand raised. Did you get a chance?
It was just a quick point of clarification. So the Seattle utility fees, would they be specific to just Seattle, or would they apply to all of the Seattle City Light projects potentially outside of Seattle too?
I don't have that level of specificity, but it's definitely a great question. And I'm glad I'm recording this because this will help anyone who's bringing these items up to be able to understand how to present to us in the future. So we'll be sure to make sure that we're following up.
I can jump in here. The reason this is specifically centered on Seattle is that Seattle is going through a process of reforming their it's like the utility hookup fee structure to make it basically right now a handful of developments happen that are like infill developments happen to get saddled with needing to pay for the full water main replacement. And then kind of the rest of the developments on that block get to coast off of it. And this is, they're doing reforms to try and smooth that out and, level the fees across the board. And as part of that process, we're looking to get an exemption from those fees for affordable housing. So it's certainly something any jurisdiction could take on, but we know that there is active policy under consideration in the state of Seattle.
Thanks for that, Jesse. And again, we're just throwing it all out there, seeing what's going to stick on the wall. We're going to keep our main idea of what is most effectively going to increase Black homeownership. So there will be further analysis for all of these ideas. In the interest of time, I'm going to go ahead and move us forward into the next box.
Ben, to put a quick pin on this discussion around the utility waiver. Also, it'll be interesting to see how SCIP can help us think about how to cover other jurisdictions that are under Seattle City Light in terms of utility provision, because you have quite a number of those in South King County, and could they be some interlocal agreement or discussions that can be held very early on as we discuss this policy concept. So just wanted to put a fine point on the importance of that question.
Thanks for that, Patience. All right, and so we have land acquisition and value capture. So for this, a few new ideas. We have the Seattle disposition of surplus land. So that's basically the idea of there are surplus parcels. A lot of them are infill. Some might be quite appropriate for homeownership projects. How can we begin to think about that disposition of that surplus land? County level, again, we had already tracked this in 2023 and we'll continue to move forward with the idea of understanding and supporting King County community preference and anti-displacement strategies. Most of that we had heard about kind of the Brooks Village project and Skyway, but there will be other instances, so we'll continue to follow that. And then on the state level, acquiring land near transit for affordable homes. I know we all were involved with motivating for the Housing Benefits District, which was last year legislation. It had a very particular concept around the idea of acquiring land near transit for home ownership and affordable homes. And so this would be more kind of making it a little bit smaller and thinking about that particular scenario. So again, what's missing and what are you excited about when it comes to land acquisition and value capture?
What is King County doing about their publicly owned properties? I've been tangentially involved in a discussion with Parks Resources about transfer development rights, and some of the parcels they own are appropriate for park, but some of the parcels they own are appropriate for development. I know Seattle's tried to do a bunch of this, King County not so much.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. Yeah, absolutely.
Maybe it becomes sort of a state level mandate of some kind that all communities in the state of Washington should be working hard to prioritize and move and properties into the mainstream that they retain.
All right, way to give it 2 for 1 there. Go with
Hey,
the
you said
county
my
and the
name wasn't
state.
going to go on it if I said.
Excellent. Anything else for anyone coming up? All right, I'm going to try to keep us going. Land acquisition and value capture. So Seattle Housing Levy, the idea being it will pass this November, especially with all of your enthusiastic support and work that you're going to do to make sure that voters say yes for homes. So we want to make sure once that does pass that we're following that administrative and financial plan and that the implementation is occurring the way that we're hoping. And then Jumpstart is also another scenario where, that has happened, it's been great, but then there have been, negotiations that have had to happen around where the funding goes temporarily and what will happen again as it comes back. We want to make sure that we're following that spend plan and advocating for homeownership. On the county level, the possibility of a King County permanently affordable homeownership development fund or funding, something to think about, something to advocate for. And then the Equitable Development Initiative, as I said before, that is something that the zoning part that we had been talking about in 2023 came from, but itself is a larger initiative, and following that implementation closely, making sure that we're thinking about homeownership. And then on the state level, again, back to some of the things that we had advocated for, the wealth tax, the housing trust fund, making sure that it's robust. The Affordable Homes Act will be coming back. Washington Future Fund will be coming back. And then the 2 new ideas, the idea of an affordable homes program budget proviso, which we'll hear more about from patients in a bit. And then maybe the possibility of a revolving construction loan for affordable home ownership. When you see these items, what is missing and what are you excited about? And if you have your hand up, just go ahead and speak.
Thank you, Bambi. This is Ann Campbell, the Managing Director for the Washington State Department of Commerce Homeownership Unit. And I am absolutely over the moon excited about a construction loan program for affordable homeownership. Some of you may know that I spent 11 years managing revolving loan accounts for the State Drinking Water Fund, the Public Works Board, and for the Community Economic Revitalization Board, CURB. And I have seen the power of initial seed capital that is then leveraged and forward committed and turned into a $2 billion resource that is used for a variety of different areas of state investments. And so revolving construction loan programs can make an enormous impact in a relatively short period of time.
Thanks for that, Anne, and excited to have your partnership. So anything else coming up for anyone? What's exciting to anyone on this list? I would have to say myself personally, like I'm so super excited for us to get reinvigorated around the wealth tax just because of the impact that it could create. It is phenomenal. And when you're going and you're looking at the funding on the state level, and then you look at what could come in from that wealth tax, it just kind of blows other funding out of the water. Kathleen?
I wanted to know who ran that last time. Who was the champion of that work?
It's Senator Frame, and we had the opportunity to meet with them last week or the week before, and they're going to come and speak with us. They were hoping to be here today and be able to speak, but they had a conflict with the meeting.
I just one of our supporters at Homestead kind of would be one of the people taxed, and she was very engaged with this concept. Approached me for some help way too late in the game around crafting a statement. So I would just love to be able to connect her earlier on with this effort, because I think she could be very helpful in making the case. So if there's an opportunity for that, let me know.
Yeah, and I don't believe prime sponsorship is going to change, so it would be Senator Frame. All right, we're a little bit past time, so I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing. I hope I didn't, freak anybody out that everything is done and you have no reason to come back in October or November because it's all set, because that's not what I'm doing. I'm basically saying, here are some ideas, here are some things that could be effective. And then what we'll do is we'll spend our time over the next couple of months really, having people come in and tell us, well, how does that most effectively increase Black homeownership? And decide what is going to be the best for the framework as we move into 2024. But without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and pass this over to Dan. And Dan, if you have anything you need to present, I can make you a co-host, or if you're just planning to give us a chat, then you're good as you are.
Just a chat.
Okay, and Dan's going to be talking to us again about the 2024 reinvigoration on the lot splitting bill.
Yeah, thanks, Bambi. And wow, amazing to see 40 some people on this call today. I think most of the folks on this call are familiar with the lot split bill from last year. So I wasn't going to go into detail about explaining what it does, although happy to get into the weeds anytime. And also I have a hard stop at 2 p.m. So I think the best use of our time would be getting any input people may have on the version of the bill last year, and any kind of ideas that people may have for improving the bill this year, because we will have opportunities to amend the bill. We're going to start with the same bill, but there will be an opportunity on the Senate side to amend it. Just real quickly, the lot split bill would allow an owner of a house lot to split off part of the lot and sell it for another home. The basic idea is to create smaller lots for less expensive ownership houses. And then there's sort of a secondary benefit that owners who are cash poor and house rich, say on fixed incomes, this gives them an opportunity to extract some money out of their property and stay in place in their community. Just real quick, the bill allows a lot to be split down to as small as 2,000 square feet. And that's regardless of what the local zoning might say about minimum lot size for houses. The The bill is HB 1245. It was primed by Representative Andrew Barkis on the House side and Senator Noel Frame on the Senate side. The bill passed out of the House 94-2. It went over to the Senate side, and during that time in session, we also were working on middle housing and ADUs, and there was a lot of concern among members that on how these three bills would interact, and especially, you know, people were worried about like, well, wouldn't the lot split bill just double the units of everything else that the ADU bill and the middle housing bill is legalizing? Whoa, we need to understand this better. It just created a lot of uncertainty and grumbling kind of in the Senate, and the powers that be decided that it would be best to basically kill the lot split bill to let people focus on the middle housing and ADU bills. So it didn't die because people didn't like the policy. It died because of, well, basically politics. And so we feel it's got a real strong chance to come back and pass again. So what we expect to have happen is that as soon as possible after session starts, the House can repass the bill that was passed last session. It comes over to the Senate, and then we'll have some time to work on amendments there. So that's the gist of what's happening. Would love to hear anybody's thoughts or you know, on how the bill looked last year, what it might have been missing, what it could, and how it could be improved this year. And also happy to answer
this is Adria.
Yeah, sure.
So I haven't read the bill. I don't know what it says, but I'm wondering, does it have like a unit limit? So if it's 2,000 square feet, could someone build up to 4 units, or is that not part of what's?
Yeah. So that was the exact issue that people were concerned about if middle housing passed. So we had right at the end there, before it died, we had amendments ready to go that said that limited the amount of units you could build on a split lot, basically to 3 units, a house and 2 ADUs, which the ADU bill legalized anyway. And we expect that amendment will be there again this year. There's a couple other little guardrails the bill has on lot size too. You can only do a lot split once. And then it also says that the split lots can't be smaller than 40% of the original lot. So it kind of prevents like crazy, huge changes in lot size.
But essentially, you're taking a 4,000 foot lot and cutting it in half, a typical city lot, and getting another 2,000 foot lot that gives you 1 more unit, because you can already do 2 units in the original lot. And I'm just wondering, how do you fit all that into 2,000 feet, 2 ADUs and a house?
I
Or
think
setbacks,
yeah, the way that the Sightline looks at a lot of these bills, people worry about, you know, building too many units on a small lot, and typically these things are self-limiting, right? You have all kinds of setback rules and lot coverage rules, and you know, maybe someone could find a way to put a house and 2 ADUs on a 2,000 square foot lot, but if they can do that, fine. You know, it's we don't think that's a problem. But it basically what I see as the advantage is it just adds another option, right? Like you can put a single house there if you want. Maybe you could try to put some house and ADUs. It's just, or you know, maybe you don't want to sell your lot and you want to build your own ADUs, right? It just gives more options.
I hadn't considered that one, the ability to sell your half a lot and keep your house. That's the fundamental.
Correct.
You said it backwards. You're actually house rich, cash poor. You said.
Yeah, sorry. Yep.
And so you can sell a lot, retain your house, and create some cash.
Correct, yes.
Yeah, and I think that was also some of the anti-displacement messaging and why this was something that we were advocating for last year. You know, when people have their lot and they can split it, and then they might be able to have extended family in the other space, they might be able to split it and sell it so that they can remain in their home. So there are a lot of options there that actually translate really well into what we're thinking about here in terms of homeownership.
Yeah, this is Adria. I mean, I could also see, I don't know, it doesn't sound like the bill allows for this since it's only 2 ADUs, but you know, a multifamily, like a multi-story, like mini apartment complex, right? I mean, I feel like it also, feel like there are different possibilities. Like when people talk about co-ops and things like that, like there are other ways that people can co-own something. So maybe the original owner who's splitting their lot, now they become a co-owner in this like new thing that they can rent out, or they can they can rent out. Maybe they choose to just sell the land, but I don't know, I feel like there are a lot of possibilities with it.
I totally agree. We would, you know, from Sightline's perspective, we'd love to say that you can build a 4-unit apartment building on the split lot. It's just politically, there's a lot of concern that that's just going to allow, well, too much housing, which, you know, we don't really think is a problem in a housing crisis, but that's the politics.
All right, any other input that we might want to provide in the next few minutes here for Dan? He does have a hard stop, and we're certainly going to hear from patients here as well. And if you just, you know, don't have the idea at this moment, but something comes to you 10 minutes later, you know, feel free to please send it to me, and I will always make sure to forward it and try to get you an answer. And again, we may be hearing from Dan again in the near future, just to understand the nuances of any changes.
And one thing I can do is I'll put a couple links in the chat right now that just for a Sightline article and the BHI explainer that we did last year, so people have that.
Yeah, Dan, and I put that one in, so go ahead and put the Sightline.
Okay, got it.
All right. Well, if nothing is coming up urgently right now at this moment, we may actually try to stay on our time frame and give patients the space that she will need to explain this next possibility. If you had seen the email that I sent out this morning, it gave you a little bit of context around this idea about a budget proviso. And with no further ado, I'm going to hand it over to patients. And patients, do you need to have a share screen possibility, or are you good?
Well, you can share screen for folks to reference the language. Before you do so, I will just begin by reminding all of you the big win that we had in the Covenant Homeownership Account bill. And in getting that bill passed, it took strategy with all of you proactively. We pulled together a work group last year, developed legislation, and all of you were mobilized and activated to support the bill to the finish line. And now we're about to pivot and do the same strategy and get a budget allocation next year. So Bambi, if you want to go ahead and share screen. The background of this budget proviso, which is simply a budget allocation for homeownership, is that following up on the work that we did last year with all of you, we're also cognizant of, it's not just the demand side that is a challenge here. We have a huge supply challenge. So we're working towards being able to catalyze supply for affordable homeownership in our state. And that's going to take a lot of innovative approaches. So this is a preliminary concept. I want all of you to be reminded that this is not legislation that's been drafted already. We're in the early conversations on what it could look like. We're inviting your thought partnership, so your reflection based on your expertise in terms of shaping the legislation to be the best that it could be in making an impact in our ecosystem currently. So I'll end with some discussion questions after reviewing what the concept is. But in summary, Bambi, if you want to scroll down, This is going to be a state capital budget allocation. We've had conversations with Representative Frank Chop, as well as state budget office staff, in getting a sense of what the best budget place is going to be to pull this funding from. Initially, we had considered the operational budget as a resource, given that there may be some surplus funding that will be floating in 2024. But the guidance that we received was the capital budget would likely be the best place to kick off a program. And over time, we're going to build up this program to expand in terms of its capacity to help catalyze production of permanently affordable homes. So the amount as we speak right now is in the range of, we could get an allocation of 3 million to 5 million. The funds would be used to help facilitate development in a couple of ways. It could be pre-development funding in particular, and that's really what we're anchoring in on. What can we do on the pre-development funding front to support and spur the production of affordable homeownership? And we're going to need your help, just to put your thinking caps on. We need your help in defining pre-development. The guidance that we've received from our partners at the state level is we need to be narrowed in defining what it is that we're going to focus on in pre-development. Is it really the full phase of pre-development, or is there a particular niche that we're going to define and make a public benefit case for? Because this is money that is coming from, of course, funding that could be within other priorities in the state. Land acquisition is another consideration of use in terms of funds to help facilitate the availability of land to produce homes across the board. The other aspect of this concept is we're aiming towards leveraging the bill that just passed this year that all of you worked on and BHI supported, and that's the middle housing bill. So as communities are opening up neighborhoods to allow more types of homes, what can we do to be sure that affordable homeownership is a part of that housing typology increase across the board? And that's going to entail some use of the funds here from the program to facilitate coordination with architects and developers in creating pre-approved design options that can then result in the development of more homes. So the question mark on that pre-approved plan is, we know that cookie cutter options don't always work. So how do we right size that at the state level, from a state level perspective, to activate local jurisdictions to be a part of that thinking of pre-approved plans? So we'd love to hear your reflections on that particular option as well. So let me give you some discussion questions based on early conversations we've heard. Number one, there's a question of the Housing Trust Fund. The Housing Trust Fund essentially does a lot of this work. How do we make this program distinct from the Housing Trust Fund? Isn't there more value in just adding funding to the Housing Trust Fund itself and just abandoning this whole pre-development funding program? So that's a big question to answer. It'll be helpful for some of you to reflect on how we can make that difference really very well defined. In the current language, we've anchored and have been clear that this is going to be a complement. It's pipeline development proactively. And would love to hear if that's coming out really well in the concept that's been shared so far. On the use of funds, I talked about pre-development being the major use and further defining that. I also talked about land acquisition being another. We were ambitious early on to think capital loans will be another aspect to be included, or could it be capital grants? So hearing your perspective on if we could move forward with that consideration. It may be too ambitious for 2024. 2024 is a supplemental budget year. We can only get so much. So it'll be helpful for some of you to reflect on that. The other questions that I've been hearing so far in early conversations is this idea of the pre-approved plans. So would love to hear any of you speaking to that as a point of consideration. Is that feasible? Are there examples that we can pull from to really leverage local jurisdictions? And then the last question I will pose is, who should coordinate this program? I know some of you get anxious about the creation of yet another program. Is this something that a third party comes in to facilitate? Is it something that Anne and her team at Commerce really drive and lead in implementation? Is it the Housing Finance Commission? Is it another party like the Association of Washington Cities? It'll be great to hear from some of you on that reflection. With that, I will pause here and open the floor and let some of the thoughts begin to flow here for all of us to shape this legislation. Ryan, you had your hand up.
I did. First off, thank you for putting all of this together. It's really interesting and good to kind of have that to look at. I guess my initial instinct when I first looked this over, which was a fairly quick glance, was 3 to 5 million was nowhere near enough. And I think we all know that. Like, I don't think that's a surprise to anybody, but that was like the initial instinct I had. But the more that I heard from what you were talking about of what you're wanting to kind of go into and the direction I think you're wanting to take it in, or at least as I heard it, which could be wrong, focused on pre-development specifically, and maybe even more like capacity building in my mind. And maybe what I started to think about was with the dollars that are being allocated, with having that proviso in the capital budget about how 50% need to be prioritized towards buy-in for developers for affordable home ownership, right? Maybe instead of this being kind of the direction that, it could be one of a couple of different ways, why don't we use this essentially as, one of the problems I think that we're going to have with that and hitting that 50% is helping build the capacity of those organizations, of those buy-in for organizations to be able to actually build more. So I wonder if it would be worthwhile to focus instead, or at least this particular thing, instead of doing it on more of the capital side, I guess, but doing it more on capacity building specifically for buy-in for organizations to build affordable home ownership opportunities. A bit more targeted in that regards to be able to kind of help that. I don't know, that's kind of just the initial. If we're talking 3 to 5 million, I think that's going to be a better use of those 3 to 5 million, especially because I shouldn't even say I imagine. I have no doubt that the capital, that Commerce is already asking for more money for housing trust, more home ownership dollars for housing trust fund in the supplemental budget. I know I'm going to be echoing that same call. I worry that asking for this as separate, when it also goes into a lot of those different, like kind of stacking on top of each other type things, just makes me feel like it might actually be better used to be targeted to helping to expand those buy-in for organizations and their capabilities. I think the other thing is, one of the questions you asked is, what's the difference between this? What would be the difference between this and all of the other programs that Commerce already kind of does? I think that's actually one way to signify the difference of it, is by having it targeted specifically to buy-in for organizations as a capacity building type of program. I think that might actually help in having that distinction between everything else that Commerce does. Just a thought.
Excellent. Thank you, Ryan. And with the buy-in for approach, is your thought that it's only based on the amount we have, or is there a role in meeting the pre-development need that we know is significant? Are we tramping up two big issues that are relevant? Because there's a capacity building concern, and then there's the pre-development need that we know exists this could just be the start of what a larger pre-development pool begins to look like in the state. Would love to hear your distinction on that.
Yeah, I mean, at least from my perspective, I do think that a big part of why I'm thinking focusing it more on a capacity building, or at least more on specifically for buy-in for organizations, I think is in part because of the total dollar figure.
Right.
I think another aspect of it is, honestly, like if we're talking about pre-development, 3 to 5 million in pre-development, Kathleen, you probably know better than I, but that's what, 3 sites, 4 sites, maybe? I mean,
it's less than, yeah.
I mean, it's helpful. Like, don't get me wrong, it's a step in the right direction, but
yeah,
you know, I kind of feel like if we're going to be able, you know, we keep talking about the importance of having buy-in for organizations, being a part of the development, being a part of actually building these homes, and you know, that being something that we as BHI want to try and encourage. This is an opportunity for us to be able to kind of, for lack of a better way of putting it, put our money where our mouth is.
Yeah, agreed. And I will say take it as infrastructure setting dollars, because 3 million or 5 million is not going to even allocate any pre-development money itself. It's figuring out the program and then coming back in 2025, where it's the first year of the biennial, to then allocate a significant amount of resources. So there are sides of this conversation that are valuable, but don't let the amount itself be the decision factor. Peter, I saw you unmute, then Kathleen, and then Adrian.
Oh, unmuting is a sign that you have something to say. Okay, I got it. I better be careful in the future. Yeah, I like the way this is going. I'm trying to think about what kind of product we're talking about here. When you say 3 to 5 million is 3 projects, sounds like you're talking about more multifamily, bigger projects. And I was thinking that this was sort of a small organization lot infill kind of thing, where we might be building a house and a couple of ADUs, or use it to in this lot splitting regime, that it's really enabling some of those owners out there that Dan was talking about, that are the house needs to come down and be rebuilt and create more houses. It's a way to enable infill lots, as opposed to, you know, a 50-unit condo. So I was a little confused on who the target, who we're enabling. Is it the small proprietor, the small existing homeowner that wants to convert? Is it a multifamily condo concept? I think those are 2 different things, and maybe this can do both, but
yeah,
that was.
It's too early to have narrowed down just a particular product, but really the premise is to leverage the duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes being enabled by House Bill 1110 in communities. So as folks are beginning to consider turning their lot into, now I can do a triplex here, can they get that collaboration with developers in doing so? And can we prioritize affordable home ownership for those opportunities? And that could be done through the centralized program. And okay. I think condos are not excluded in that, or more of a denser type of development is not excluded.
Okay, I think that makes sense. Particularly in the duplex, triplex, I think we're talking about the smaller scale.
Yeah.
The enthusiasm that I heard from, I don't remember her name, from the state about a revolving concept that has been so successful. Does this revolve in any way, or is this, okay, but wouldn't we get more traction? Maybe there's part subsidy, part revolving. So maybe the early underwriting expenses are revolving, and then when they get their master loan, they pay that back. Or I don't want to make it too complicated, but there's, and to get to affordability, there's going to have to be some subsidy. There's no question about it. But
Yeah.
could a portion of it revolve and a portion of it be subsidy?
Good question to put a pin on that, Peter, unless Annie, you want to jump in here.
I'm not sure that I fully caught all of Peter's question, but revolving loan funds are eminently sustainable as long as they are set up so that payments are expected and that the interest rates to be paid are very, 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 very low. I'm thinking like 1% at most, because that keeps it accessible. And then they're just a really excellent tool for both maximizing an initial investment plus creating the opportunities for doubling and tripling that investment moving forward.
Fantastic. Well, thank you. Bambi, can you do a quick time check here? And then
Yeah, and then I wanted to add
Yeah,
something.
we're about 4 minutes until the next section here, but we have Kathleen and Adria.
got it. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to concur with some of the thinking that Ryan got started. But when we think about the organizations that need funds like this at these size levels, we are talking about smaller organizations who are probably not going to launch off with their first project. It's probably not going to be a big multifamily thing. It is probably going to be a little community-based something or other with 12 or fewer units. And in that regard, the amount of funds that are available could be spread over, where I have like 6 sirens going by. I don't know if you can hear that. I can't hear myself think.
Are you okay, Kathleen? I'm a little worried now.
I hope so. I didn't call them. So smaller amounts, and the idea of the revolving construction loan funding, I think is something that would be very helpful. The also like loan guarantees for smaller organizations, so that when they go to get their first construction financing loan, they've got a little bit of backing behind them, so that they can get started. I don't know how many small organizations are doing are starting up as permanently affordable home ownership. So that's another question, even though that's my bias. I think we also want to think about the broader toolkit of home ownership across the state as we advance these things, and not entirely exclude other programs from the benefit of whatever we put forward.
Absolutely. And I want to clarify that the revolving loan for construction is separate, right? It's important work that's moving forward. And I want to continue to hear feedback on this pre-development funding that we're thinking of in terms of the direction it's going. How else do we sharpen it to be really relevant in our ecosystem to meet that pre-development need? Adria, you had your hand up.
Yes, thank you. So in terms of pre-development, and I think just in general, like what I'm hearing is that, there are a lot of projects, a lot of programs that could increase the supply of affordable housing, but it's not necessarily, and it's not guaranteed that any of this housing is going to be available for Black people. So I think that pre-development can be, I know the state is still looking at special purpose credit programs and racially focused initiatives and the legality of all of that. But I think that pre-development is also an opportunity for developers to assess who is most likely to take advantage of the housing that they're building. Because, if we know what the demographics are around most of the sites of where this housing is going to be built, we can make some general assumptions about who's most likely to take advantage of that housing. So I feel like pre-development is an opportunity for developers to show that they've done some market analysis. They have an affirmative marketing plan. They're doing something that says we're building this housing, but it's going to be available to a wide variety of people. So then at least we know that we're moving in the direction where, if we're trying to increase home ownership for Black people, that we know that Black people have high likelihood of taking advantage of these opportunities.
Thank you so much for that point. And that brings up a question for the group. Would there be interest in moving such a program forward to dedicate some of the homes that would come out of this support to be folks who qualify, for example, for the Covenant Homeownership account funding? Because that's another consideration that we've discussed as a possible path. Could it be that we restrict it to particular programs that are existing and really targeted towards the population we want to serve? So we can put a question on that, continue to explore what it could look like, and hear some feedback from developers on if it could or could not work in terms of implementation. Great. So there's a question from Jason on the use of funds and pre-approved. Jason, as I opened earlier, this is really preliminary thinking over weekend writing that I've done and looking for all the help that folks can lend. So the idea has not come from some top place where it's coming down for folks to just support. It's early on. And if you have any particular feedback on how we get the pre-approved plan concept being considered in the use of funds, we'll be all ears to hear how we do that well. All right, with that, I will say that as part of our next steps, we will be convening a working group on this concept and continuing to sharpen the ideas of what it could look like. So if you have any additional language that could be added, please send that our way. The pre-development definition is an area where we need particular language. Kathleen and others, I know you've been doing this work and you have some language that we could leverage. If you could send that our way, that would be appreciated. And Bambi can guide folks on the timelines for the first meetings, but we'll be inviting some of you into a smaller group that's going to be really diving deep into shaping legislation. And at each monthly meeting here, we'll be providing an update on the iterative bill versions. And with that, I will hand back over to Bambi before I respond to Ryan here.
All right. So I hope everyone's rolling with it, that we are really just in it. We're laying it all down here. There is nothing that is completed or planned. We are just at the beginning and so eager to have your feedback and to continue to receive it as we learn more and things evolve. Jesse is going to give us a quick update, some important things that have occurred recently with the Seattle Comprehensive Plan update. That was on our 2023 framework, and we've been following it very closely, and it is kind of kicking into high gear right now. And so we'll hear from Jesse.
Oh, I'd say it's kicking into mid-gear. We were really expecting the release of the draft environmental impact statement and plan originally early September. And so I was hoping to potentially even share some initial feedback from that or initial results, but they've postponed it still to mid-October. Still have not yet given us a firm date of when they expect that draft plan to be released. As Bambi mentioned earlier, we have a council candidate forum tonight, 6 p.m. at the First Baptist Church in Capitol Hill. That's really focused on the comprehensive plan update. We don't completely know what the city is planning in terms of engagement events, setting up a meeting with their new communications manager to find out more about their sequence of events. So we're still in a bit of a holding pattern pending additional information from the city, but expecting a compressed round of engagement in basically mid to late October through November. And God help us if this just ends up over the holidays or something, but don't have a ton more information to share at this point in time.
So that's just kind of a global heads up for everyone that comp plan is huge. It is 20 years of our future. We have only an opportunity every decade to contribute to it, and it cannot fall to the side just because the timing has changed. This draft environmental impact statement coming out when we're in the middle of having an election and a whole bunch of other stuff will be top of mind is not ideal. But I really appreciate Jesse doing the work of asking the candidates, get this top of mind, pushing it top of mind, because it is super important. So just giving you all that heads up that there has been an unexpected path, and we will be maybe having a compressed effort. And so just hoping that you'll continue to tune in with the digests. And if there's an opportunity that presents itself, then we'll definitely be passing it on to you. So we're almost at the end of the meeting here. I am absolutely impressed that we got all of that stuff in with all the little minutes on the agenda. But this is the moment at which it's just the open floor. So, you know, please share your news with the other participants here and let us know what's going on, something that should be on the top of mind for us.
Hey, Bambi, this is Kathy McCall with AARP. I don't necessarily have an event or anything to talk about, but one of the things I've been popping in and out of this conversation and presentation, I really appreciate it, and I look forward to kind of seeing, I missed a couple of the slides where you were going over the potential focus areas on the city, county, and state levels. But one of the things I'm trying to wrestle with, and this is something, a bill that Senator Nobles had introduced last session, and I think it has resonance for this group. And so within DSHS and our state Medicaid program is that the state will use somebody's home to pay for long-term care, for asset recovery. And the concern that I have, and I think Senator Nobles did as well, was that, you know, that takes a lot of the equity out of a house, which could be generational wealth to pass down to, you know, a child, a grandchild, what have you. I want to look more into it. And I didn't know if there's anyone that knew more about that than I did, but I was just kind of struck me as, you know, not great as we talk about, you know, intergenerational wealth transfer, and then, you know, somebody losing their home and the equity in that home, which goes to long-term care, you know, that also puts the family, you know, generationally in peril. So I saw Ryan raise his hand.
I was just putting myself in the list for after you, Kathy. I don't have a response to that.
This is Adria. I mean, what would be the alternative? Like if someone couldn't afford long-term care, I mean, how would they pay for it?
I guess it's looking at the overall equity in a home. So let's say, just rounding, let's say the house, you know, is it would sell on the market for $500,000, and they have, you know, $200,000 in equity. The cost of the long-term care is $100,000, but the other $100,000 never gets turned back to the estate of the family. That could actually be used to offset the cost of the house for them to transfer it to their name.
I understand. I think, I mean, people take equity out of their house to pay for college or to do like IVF. Like, I guess I don't understand, like, if someone was in a situation where they needed to go into long-term care and they didn't have like life insurance with a long-term care rider or something like that, like where would they get the funds? I mean, I understand the equity piece, but I don't, like, why can't they use their house? I mean, if that's what they choose to do.
No, I'm trying to understand, because it almost sounds like then the state is becoming this asset like they're holding on to these assets and then selling them for more than was actually used for the long-term care.
Oh, I see. Thank you. Thanks.
So I want to dig into this, but I was just going to see if anybody knows about it, because it seems.
I don't know. This is Linda Taylor. I don't know anything about it, but I'd like to be on a committee with you digging into it, because it's concerning me also. And it appears that the state is holding on to it longer than the person even lives. So whether there just should be a limit to the amount that they can do. If you have an asset, they will drain you dry until there's nothing left, is what I've been seeing. There should be a limit or a cap or something. So how do I get in touch with whoever's working on it?
Kathy, do you feel like you'd like to connect with Linda? And maybe
Yeah, Linda, I'll put my email in the chat if you want to just.
Okay, I'm on a cell phone. It's very difficult to get it out.
Okay, all right. Well, if you tell me what your cell phone number is, or
I can connect you both by email.
I'd be happy to connect you both.
Thank you, Patience. Thank you.
All right,
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, that's really concerning to me, and that does drain a lot of African American wealth from the home.
Adria,
They even changed the rules how far back they go if you sell it. Even if you sell it to get it out of your name, they're there's a limit on that. I think they go 4 years back.
It's 5.
It's a 5-year asset test.
People still don't have the money.
No. So I wanted to just share from my personal experience a couple of things. Number one is that this is definitely where the wealth and access gaps really, really manifest. There are a number of estate attorneys out there who specialize in ways to protect assets and allow for the asset to go into a family trust name so that the elder in question doesn't appear to have any assets, and it's something that has to be done well in advance because of that 5-year rule. And also I know, again, personal experience, that there are some retirement villages that allow for progressive retirement, first with no assistance needed, then with some assistance needed, and then with full care needed, that people buy into. They sell their homes, they buy into it, and regardless of how long they actually need the services, whether it is for 20 years or 10 years or 5 weeks, it doesn't matter, because the amount that they spent to buy into it does not then revert back to their estate for their heirs. So it's absolutely a way that people lose wealth, generationally speaking. And that's not just a state thing, that's private entities as well.
Well, thank you so much for bringing this up, Kathy. And it looks like I will connect you all in an email. And then maybe if you have some leverage that moves forward, you decide there's something that we should be knowing about, you can come back in and let us know. This is why I love an open floor, right? So that we can have people bringing in their voice and the things that they're thinking about. I saw one other announcement here that I'm just going to highlight that was inside the chat. So we have the Dr. Henry Louis Gates event conversation. I'm super excited about that. It starts tomorrow. The link's here as well. I'll be there, so you can say hi to me there. I will be there tonight as well for that comp plan conversation. So if you wanted to come by for that candidate comp plan conversation and say hi. And then Ryan, one quick thing to close us out here, because we are at the hour.
No worries. I was just going to emphasize the importance of every single person on this call and everybody signing up to help renew the Seattle housing levy. I know that we as the BHI have prioritized renewing the Seattle housing levy, and it's important that we all take action to do that. I know we at Habitat Seattle are doing a lot of phone banks. Sadly, I can't be at the Henry Louis Gates event, which will be awesome, and I'm thoroughly jealous about that. But we should have, we will have a phone bank tomorrow. We have phone bank on the 12th with HDC, and hopefully somebody from HDC can share a link to that. We basically have phone banks going 2 to 3 times a week. So please make sure to RSVP, register. You can check them out on our website. You can check them out everywhere, sign up for our alerts, and you can regularly get our signups when we're doing things. Make sure you sign up as quick as possible. Thanks so much. And Cliff will follow up later today about more phone bank opportunities coming up.
One last addition, we have levy signs at the HDC office. Please stop by and grab a sign and let's get the levy passed. Thanks, everybody.
All right. Well, thank you all so much for spending your time. I will be sure to send out notes, and we will have the video from this as well if there's anything you wanted to review. Have a super great day.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.